Are there any weirdos here? I'm quite pleased by that. Apparently I'm weird. I did something recently that a lot of people considered weird. I fired myself. It is kind of funny. I'll tell you the story. So I was CEO of one of New Zealand's fastest growing technology startups that I founded, and I appointed somebody else to be my boss. And people were surprised. Then my company grew from just an idea 6 years ago, and now we've got 15,000 customers around the world. We've got customers in 130 countries. We've got a team of 200 spread across Auckland and Melbourne and London and San Francisco and Toronto. And we're constantly regarded as one of the top 10 startups to watch. We just partnered with Apple, which was pretty cool. So why the hell was I stepping out of the CEO role? But as a founder and CEO of a company, you often have to wear multiple hats. And so there's the shareholder hat, there's the director hat, there's the visionary hat, there's the cultural leader hat. And it's cool having a title of CEO. I mean, who wouldn't want to be CEO, right? But I was doing things like running a business, designing a global sales organization, all of these things. They were all really, really interesting. And also the very first time I'd ever done these things. But it wasn't as much fun as talking to customers and innovating and doing all that really cool stuff. My vision for the company was to change the world of retail. And I wanted to get back to that. And I love spreadsheets as much as the next person, but I reckon there's probably people out there who love spreadsheets a bit more. And we were going really fast, so I thought we could go faster. And so the best way to do that, I thought, was to get somebody else in as CEO. And how do you do that? Well, you call them CEO. How cool are you? Welcome on board. And then I could hand over all my stuff that I was doing. Sometimes you have to take yourself out of the equation to find the best solution. This is something that we try and do a lot at Vend. It's just part of our culture. I would say it's a no-ego thing, but I have a huge one. But I don't need to be the boss of the world in order to change it. But people still didn't get it. You were fired. Nope. You got bored. Seriously? You'd made millions and you're going sailing on a yacht. I wish. That sounds pretty good. So there was a range of views there, right? And everybody wanted to believe anything but the truth. Because the decision I made didn't match other decisions that they've seen made. It wasn't the sort of thing that a CEO did. It didn't match the pattern of the collective wisdom. It was weird. And I don't have a problem with being considered weird. I do weird things all the time. I've kind of made a thing out of it. I kind of want to live a life less ordinary. But thinking about all this got me thinking about how weirdos, like me, make radical calls that they think will make a huge difference. It's not that we're trying to go out there and cause trouble. But what makes a weirdo? Are they born? Are they made? Were they dropped on their head as a child? And as a species, we're really good at conforming, being predictable. And this is probably why we've survived for so long. Thousands of years ago, before the internet, but after the dinosaurs, somewhere in that period, we were simple tribes. And we surrounded ourselves with others just like us, that we understood, we could predict, and together, things were safe. Anybody doing anything unpredictable was considered a liability. Imagine if we all decided that we wanted to go hunt lions, and we all had our own idea as to how it was best to hunt lions. I'm going to throw rocks at lions. I'm going to run at them with my hands waving. We'd all basically be dead. But sometimes a weirdo tries something that's a bit different. Despite being ignored, despite being shunned, they persevere, they fail, they try again, and eventually it works. They convince somebody of their new idea, then two, then three, then eventually the entire group own the idea, and it becomes part of the establishment. So that weirdo creates change. And did you know this? That our brains are really good at finding patterns. They're pattern matching machines. And recognizing patterns is way easier than having to think about every single detail all the time. So we find things that we can repeat and usually get the same results. What a tribe member looks like, what scary animals look like, what non-poisonous food looks like. But just following patterns means we never actually learn anything new. So in order to evolve and better ourselves as a species, we occasionally need to screw up the pattern. but we're programmed not to like it when other idiots try and screw up the pattern. They make us think too hard, and if they're wrong, we're probably going to get eaten by lions. And that's a problem. But we're all capable of being weird. Have you checked out teenagers recently? But we grow up, and at first we're really good at obeying. You know, when you're a small child and you can't walk or feed yourself, it's kind of important that you obey. But then we start to develop language and motor skills, and then we start to develop an imagination. We wonder about the worlds we dream about, where the sun goes every day, why we throw stones at lions, why do we eat green things. And then we start to rebel. We start to take these ideas and we decide that we want to go out in the world and discover new things and take the ideas that we've learned and try new things. We go off on our own path. We want to throw stones at the lions. But then for some reason we stop. We stop being weird and we conform. And it probably has something to do with the fact that 10,000 years ago, there was a high probability you'd be dead by 30. And so to keep the pattern going, you had to have kids. And they would start the new cycle of going through weirdness. And so going through the cycle many times, the tribe would evolve. The young rebels will try stuff out and hopefully not get eaten by a lion. But not so much these days. These days, that progression from obedience to wonder to question to rebel and then ultimately to conform, which was a perfectly good system 10,000 years ago, today looks more like this. We live a bit longer than 30, and that's a bloody long time to be a conformist. But some of us never stop that tendency to be weird now and then. Today, it's never been easier or safer to be weird. There's a distinct lack of lions hanging about for a start. So what makes those of us who keep being weird, keeping being weird? How do we be more weird? Do we need more weird? What would happen if we had a lot more weird? If we were all weird, would that be normal? So I got to thinking about what made me weird. And I did a lot of thinking and hundreds of hours of therapy. And I figured out that I became weird when I was around about 7 or 8, all because I didn't fit a pattern. Remember the patterns. And it's a pattern that I would have loved to have fit. But I didn't. I had a group of friends at school, and we did everything together. We played together. We had the same sense of humor. We liked the same things. We had fun. We were peers. But the way that they learned matched a particular pattern. They were quick with math. They could spell really well. And they were identified as having special abilities that other kids didn't have. So they were picked to be in what was called a special class, a special accelerated learning class. And I didn't. This innocent pattern matching to find kids that were different made me feel like I didn't fit in. And I couldn't understand what made me different from my friends. And that's when I think I started beginning to think a bit like a weirdo. And not an in-your-face weirdo. I wasn't angry. I just refused to accept that my friends were any different. And it's funny what you remember from your childhood, right? Shortly after that, I moved to Australia, not my choice. And I remember it was the start of a new school year, and it was a class exercise to draw a picture of Australia. And I was 9, I wasn't really familiar with the geography of Australia, so I drew this blob. And then I thought about, what does Australia look like? And I imagined flying over Australia in a plane, and I thought there must be fields and things and rivers and all that sort of stuff. They probably grow lots of really exciting food in Australia. And so I started to draw this really highly detailed lattice of squares and stripes all across Australia, colouring it in green and yellow. And I thought there's probably fruit trees, so a bit of red. There's probably some rivers, so a bit of blue. And I thought I'd drawn this highly detailed, high-resolution map of Australia, whereas all the other kids in the class drew a yellow Australia-shaped Australia. But then my teacher did something I'll never forget, and probably accounts for several hours of therapy. She ridiculed me in front of the class. Look at this silly kid who uses imagination and drew something different. It was probably because I was a New Zealander, but that didn't stop me from doing things differently. And then a couple of years later, back in New Zealand now, thankfully, I had to write a book report, and I can't remember what the book was about, but it was boring. And I also knew that book reports were boring, so I decided that I'd do it a little bit differently, and I'd write it as a humorous poem. And to my surprise, my teacher stood up in front of the class and asked me if I was special. And I thought, yes! Finally, the recognition I was looking for to be considered special. But it was the 80s, and she was actually referring to the other kind of special. She didn't appreciate my poetic approach. And this was a semi-regular experience in my life, but being ignored or ridiculed, I somehow kept trying to do things that were slightly different if I didn't match the pattern. There was like the time when I was at university. So we had this problem, and I came up with a really interesting way to solve the problem. It was an image compression algorithm. I won't bore you with the details. But it really fascinated me, and so I really applied myself. Now, for the most part, I was a slacker. I just cruised along. I did only the bare minimum to get through. But this problem really caught my interest. And so I spent weeks and weeks and weeks coming up with this amazing solution. And it was so different and so amazing that my lecturer accused me of cheating. So I dropped out of university, never finished my degree, went out and started businesses. Some worked, some failed. But my need to do things differently ultimately led me to start a company that I recently fired myself from. The company I started in the middle of the GFC, because I thought that would be weird. And in building this business at Vend, we developed a culture of individuality, creativity, openness, and transparency. And we did things very, very differently. Again, unlike any other companies. And it was considered weird. But by doing these things differently and weirdly, we became New Zealand's fastest growing tech company. And we became the leader in our emerging field. Ironically, this all happened because I didn't match a pattern to find kids who were different. When my friends were picked to be in that special class, the pattern made me weird. And the pattern's not always right. We've already heard this today. The patterns in science, the patterns in healthcare, the patterns in education. And so I think more weird is good. I love weirdness all over the place. I want more weird in the world. And it's never, ever been in the history of this planet been safer to be weird. There's no lions anywhere. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. The world has probably got a lot more weird people in it than it used to 10,000 years ago. And in fact, in this room, we're probably overflowing with weirdness. But how do we get more weirdos? Does it start with the 8-year-olds? Do we encourage creativity and thinking outside the square? Do we encourage thinking differently enough? Screw the special class, we're all in it. Well, last year, I tried to recreate some of the steps that made me a weirdo. So I launched a charity with fellow TEDxer Michelle Dickinson and future TEDxers Zoe Timbrell and Rab Heath. And this charity is based around giving kids from every background an opportunity to be weird with technology. So we get a whole bunch of passionate kids into a room, a whole bunch of crazy technology, and we let them go. We let them discover it, we let them imagine, we let them discover, we let them invent. And it's kids of every background, so it's 50% boys, 50% girls, but also we work with the low decile schools as well. So we make sure that half of the kids coming along are coming from backgrounds where access to this sort of technology just would normally be out of their reach. And we do that by sponsoring them through it. And this is really important because being weird is not a privileged white male thing. And the results are amazing. These are some photos from one of the recent events. You can just see how many kids that we get along to these things. And we just let them explore new ways of thinking. So, playing with robot gloves is not a crazy idea. You're learning how to code, learning how to 3D print, learning about drones, learning about science and nanotechnology, because this is our future. And we want to encourage the 10-year-olds today to become the innovators in 10 years' time. But what about the rest of us? What about us here who are in that dreaded conformist stage? I'm not calling you guys conformists, by the way. Is it too late? Or is there a part of us that never forgets how to be weird, except for the stupid instinct that tries to protect us from these lions that makes us all conformists? Do we never forget how to be a weirdo, but we just become too scared? So what are you going to do? Be weird? Encourage the weirdos? Or continue to ignore them? The lions aren't real anymore. Thank you.